Yeah, let's not beat around the bush. Let's just bring the special interview to the show tonight. Is that the one? No, I don't think that's the interview tonight, is it?
I think
No, it's not
right.
that one. I think it's that one. Christopher Hipkins, welcome to the show.
G'day, guys. How are you?
Yeah, we're doing all right. How are you doing? I've been speaking to your people, and they've all been like, "Oh, it's a long weekend with late nights. You recovered yet? Are you comfortable? Are you ready for a hard grilling? Is that what we're going to do? I don't know."
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the conference went really well, but yeah, I think everyone's hanging out for a Christmas holiday, to be honest. It felt like a very, very long year for everyone. It doesn't matter what field you're working in, whether you're working in politics or anything else. I think Kiwis are just ready now for Christmas. It's like, bring on Christmas now. Everyone wants to hit the beach and the barbecue.
Yeah. Let me just say, some people have been submitting video questions through the last couple of days. Just for you people who have done that, we're not going to use all of them. We'll use a couple of them. We'll get to them. And the other thing, remember, is sometimes these conversations we're having will basically answer some of the questions you ask. So if that happens, then we'll put those ones to the side as well. Hey, but look, I thought we could just start somewhere. It's a bit of breaking news at about 6:30 tonight. We found out about a death of one of the young men in the boot camp trial. And I heard that I was watching one news and I was like, hang on, what? Rewound it, and oh my gosh, and then it seems to be not at the boot camp, which of course would be everybody's worst fear, but it was because of a car accident. But I just want to bring up this summary written by someone on Blue Sky. The death is tragic and underlies the total failure of the boot camp system. In 4 months, at a cost of $8.7 million, this vanity project has taken 10 kids and one has died, one is on the run from police, one stole a car and is back in the system, one left after 2 weeks. Imagine if the dollars was spent on actual support. That was from a Blue Sky calling themselves once were gardeners. I don't know, as if leader of the opposition, do you kind of get, like when there's a big news story, do they inform you as well? And if they have, is there anything you can share with us? Or just what are your thoughts around what we're hearing?
I haven't got any inside information on that, but I mean, what I do know though, having been Minister of Police for a period of time, is boot camps were never going to work, because if you look at the issues here, why are these kids getting into trouble in the first place? It's usually because they've got major dysfunction in their lives, and unless you fix the dysfunction, taking them out, sticking them in boot camp for a couple of months, and then sending them back out into the community is not really going to change anything for them. So, if you go back to when I became Minister of Police, it's going back a while now, sort of 2.5 years ago, but we were right in the height of that ram raid epidemic that was happening around the place. I became Minister of Police and would wake up every morning thinking how many were there overnight. It was just absolutely horrific. But when we got the police and justice and education and MSD and Oranga Tamariki and all of those agencies in, we found out there's about 96 kids who were at the core of it all. And so I said to these agencies, well, what are you doing with these 96 kids? And as soon as we started providing wraparound support, I know that's a bit of a woke term these days, but as soon as we started providing proper support to their families, 75% of those kids stopped reoffending. And if that's frankly, and it cost a fraction of the cost of this boot camps did. So if you actually want better outcomes for these kids, support the families. That's actually what's going to keep the community safer.
Maybe we can get your feel on a couple of other stories that are going on at the moment. Chewie found out about this and shared it quite late in yesterday's show. But the Marsden Fund is being cut. Business groups are backing it. Universities are criticising it. Changes to a critical science fund are short-sighted and will have a negative impact on universities' ability to do really minor stuff like carry out research in both humanities and social sciences. A senior academic at Victoria University says, but business groups say the change to the Marsden Fund were the right move and would boost productivity, living standards and economic growth. What they forget to say is probably living standards for the top 10%, which is normally what those things do. But and it's sort of yesterday, it's sort of an unveiling story. It's showing itself. What about that? What are your thoughts on what's happened with the Marsden Fund?
Well, I'm not sure if they've really been paying attention to the areas of the economy which actually have the potential for significant growth, but many of them are in our creative industries. If we actually want to get wealthier as a country, there's only so many cows you can farm. There's only so many trees you can grow and cut down. You actually have to do other things as well. So sectors like gaming, for example, huge potential growth for New Zealand in that area. Then actually it's in the humanities and social sciences and the arts, frankly, that you actually need really talented people. And so I just think we're kind of missing the point here with this. some of the people who go and work in sciences actually do humanities and social sciences as well. And surely we want to live in a country that values all kind of research pursuits rather than just ones that have an immediate dollar return with them. I mean, anyone who's read any decent history of the world will know that some of the greatest scientific discoveries in the history of humanity were made by accident, by people researching something completely different.
Yeah. Chewie, anything on those questions you want to get out before we move on?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that anybody knows their history, since that's part of humanities. You know, and a big part of what they do is study how societies interact with things like a global pandemic, or how they react to things like government mandates, or how societies evolve over time, how different races interact with each other, or all. You can't monetize any of that, so there's clearly no value to it. It just seems to me that this is more of this government knowing the cost of everything and the value of nothing.
Oh, totally. But the thing is, even if you take Nicola Willis's social investment mantra, then actually a lot of the research coming out of the social sciences is pretty important stuff. So, you know, I was just reading something just before I came on here, where they've priced in the cost of poverty to the health system. It's massive. So, you know, this is a government that's saying, oh, you know, the health systems, and we haven't got enough money for the health system. Well, deal with poverty and you wouldn't need to put as much money into the health system. You know, that research comes out of social sciences, not out of the hard sciences.
Speaking of health, how does your office react when you hear the noise being made around Aisha Verrall making a cooking the books claim? You guys comfortable with that? Is that the kind of mongrel we want to see in the Labor Party? How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I actually think it's a reasonably accurate description. If you look at what they've done, they've basically transferred costs from the future and put them into the last financial year. So these are costs that haven't yet been, incurred. They put them into the last financial year to make the last financial year look worse, so that when the next year's books come out, they can say, "Oh, look, everything's better." When actually they haven't made anything better. They've just transferred money from one year backwards through time. And I don't really, I don't know. I don't know if there's any other accurate description for it, to be frank.
Well, but in fairness, when she used that term, she wasn't talking about the current situation. She was saying you have a history of cooking the books. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I think she's accessed a bit more information about the history of the commissioner and what he did with previous DHBs than I have. But I have complete faith in Aisha Verrall. If she's making that claim, she'll have a good grounds for it.
Yeah. Well, there seemed to be some reporting yesterday about when the commissioner left some other jobs, things went from profits to losses. That's what we've read. We're really careful not to make that accusation in case it is defamatory. I want to talk to you about Dunedin Hospital because you made some promises over the weekend. But before I do that, how can any party make a pre-election promise anymore? Like, you've made a promise about the rebuild to Dunedin Hospital, obviously something in the country, but me and Chewie are both in Dunedin. But how can you make that promise knowing that, as we've just seen, after the election you have to go into negotiation, and then what if another party doesn't want to do that? So how do you make any kind of promise at all pre-election for what you're going to do?
I mean, I think, frankly, you need to be better at the art of post-election negotiations than the current Prime Minister was. He seemed to take the attitude, well, because he didn't get an outright majority, then therefore everything that the National Party campaigned on was somehow, just a guideline that maybe that they may or may not do. Actually, the National Party is still by far the biggest party in government. And I think he clearly gave up in negotiations far too early, and also gave some of those smaller parties a bunch of stuff that New Zealanders clearly didn't vote for. So, I mean, I think the way you deal with that is you clear before the election. Look, these are our bottom lines. These are the things that we won't do. These are our bottom lines and the things that we must do. Of course, everything in the middle is negotiable. In many cases, with the parties that we've worked with previously, it's been a question of how far can we get in terms of the stuff that we're proposing to do, rather than doing completely the opposite, which seems to be what this government are doing.
It does feel funny when Christopher Luxon says, ACT's not happy and we're not happy. And I'm like, I thought negotiation was about a win-win. He keeps selling it like this is a lose-lose. I'm a negotiator. We negotiated a lose-lose. No one's happy. But recently, we also heard out. Well, we're being informed that the treaty principle referendum was not a bottom line, or never had to get to the point with ACT for a bottom line. That Jack Tame interview, you guys must have salivated when you heard that. I know we did. It was an incredible piece of news to talk about. But when it comes to those negotiations, so that says one of two things to me. Either Christopher Luxon is not a good negotiator and Seymour just walked him around, or for some reason Christopher Luxon was okay with this legislation, even though he's running away from it now. They're the only two possibilities.
I think it's a combination of both. I think clearly he's not a very good negotiator, but second of all, I think there was a huge amount of political naivety when they negotiated this agreement. I think he genuinely didn't appreciate the significance of what he was signing the government up to. I think he looked at that and said, "Oh, that's just something that we can give them. It's, you know, we're going to vote for it at first reading. We won't vote for it at second reading. Ah, no big deal. We'll just agree to that." I don't think he actually realised what a lightning rod this was going to be. So I think it was a combination of bad negotiation and naivety.
What's going on in that coalition? And this, I'll give you three examples as to what I'd like you to speak to. Last week, David Seymour tells the news it's all ACT policies that are going through. The day after that, Winston says that Christopher Luxon's struggling. And then in the weekend, we find out that a huge embarrassment to the Prime Minister that the treaty referendum wasn't a bottom line. What are those other two doing? What's it about?
Well, I mean, I said before the election during one of those leaders' debates that I thought Winston Peters and David Seymour would run circles around Christopher Luxon. And I think that that's proven to be true. But I think what you've seen from their comments in the last week or two is that they don't really respect him. You know, they wouldn't be out there making those comments about Christopher Luxon if they actually respected him and respected the job that he was doing as Prime Minister. You know, even if they might disagree from time to time, if they respected him, they wouldn't be undermining him in the way that they are now. So it's clear, I don't think that Winston Peters and David Seymour respect him. And I think that creates a lot of friction within the government. It's also clear that they don't really respect each other. I mean, they've got a long history of taking pot shots at one another. You know,
Yeah.
Winston Peters promising to knock David Seymour out, and, you know, various other things, and David Seymour calling Winston Peters a crook. You know, that's all on record. It's clear that clearly that animosity hasn't gone away.
That's how they should have decided the deputy prime ministership, if you ask me. They should have gotten into the ring. That would have been a pay-per-view, raise some money. Hey, Chewie, you can jump back in a sec. I'm just going to ask one more question because I said we'd come back to this. Dunedin Hospital. You've said at the weekend you're going to rebuild it. With respect, Labor said they'd build it, then Labor downgraded it. National said, we'll do the original, and then National downgraded it. When you say you'll rebuild it, what do you mean?
Yeah, so we set out before the election what we committed to build, and it was that original, you know, size hospital that was committed to. So yes, we had looked at whether we should cut the cost of the hospital, and in the end reversed that decision, went back to promising, you know, delivering Dunedin what they had been promised. The outpatients building is well advanced. You know, I drove past it a couple of weeks ago. It's looking really good. And the main hospital building, the foundations have already been laid for it. You know, they've already driven the piles for it. So the idea that now they go back to the drawing board is just crazy. And also, you know, they complain as a government, oh, the cost of everything keeps going up. Every time you stop something and do another review of it, the cost goes up again. So they're actually contributing to the escalation of cost.
Yeah, the cheapest time to build something was yesterday.
Totally.
It gets more and more expensive. Chewie.
Nothing ever gets cheaper because you do a review of it.
Yep.
I kind of want to circle back a little bit, talking about obviously the interaction between National, New Zealand First, and ACT and their leaders. What lessons are there for you in your own negotiations for the next election, dealing with your own potential coalition partners?
Well, I don't think it's something that you start the day after the election or, you know, weeks after the election. I think it's something that you start working on early, because, you know, we've already had some conversations with the Greens and conversations with the Māori Party. They're different parties. We're cooperating and competing. You know, it's MMP. We're out for every vote that we can get. But the basic sort of bottom line that I gave them, and actually I think they're on board with this too, is unlike the current government, we can disagree agreeably. We can basically say, look, we don't agree with that, but we can be respectful towards one another. We don't have to take pot shots towards one another. We don't have to undermine the public confidence that we can work together. You can work together with people you disagree with. And so I think that's the key lesson for us is in the next 2 years, whilst we're in opposition, we've actually got to demonstrate to New Zealanders that we can work constructively together even where we disagree. And, I'll give you just a practical example of what that looks like. When I was in opposition last time, I was Labour's education spokesperson. Tracy Martin was New Zealand First's education spokesperson. We worked on the select committee together. We actually became very good friends, though we were in different political parties. And when it came time to form the government, we had a really good, constructive, positive working relationship from the very first day we were ministers. And I think those are, that doesn't mean we agreed on everything. All the way through government, there were regular areas where we would disagree, but it never became a problem. And so I think that's something that these guys don't seem to be able to do. They don't seem to be able to say, okay, well, look, we're going to disagree on that, but we're going to move forward on that. That sort of conversation just doesn't seem to be happening. They seem to, or where it is happening, it's happening through the media, which is quite bizarre.
I guess the thing that focuses it that in my mind is that there was a little bit of sniping between Labour and Greens right at the election that didn't, in my opinion at least, didn't reflect very well on anybody. It seemed a bit more divided than what you're describing there. Was that reflected on?
I don't think there really was. I mean, I think if you look at Labour and the Greens will disagree from time to time. I think we've generally managed to do that pretty constructively. Our own history will show, if you go back all the way back, I've been around a while, if you go all the way back to 2002, when Labour and the Greens last kind of openly attacked each other during a general election campaign, which is what happened in 2002, both parties went down. Both parties lost support as a result of that. So there's, I've been really clear. I'm not out there to take votes off the Green Party. I mean, I welcome Green Party voters, but I'm not chasing those votes. I want to take votes off National, New Zealand First, and ACT. That's ultimately how we're going to form the government.
Yeah. We talk about this a lot, Chris, and we think as, what are we, armchair critics here, Chewie? That the job of the Greens is to activate I'm going to use terms that people go, there's no such term, but to activate the far left. The far left seem to be the apathetic ones in America. The far left are the ones that didn't come out and vote because they were grumpy around Israel and Gaza and Biden's stance on it. Greens' job is to activate the far left, to get them up and get them voting. Māori Party, obviously Māori is their vote. And the job for the Labour Party is to own that centre and take as many of those swing voters, many of those centrist voters off National as you can. And that we see that and we think it is actually then a coalition that can own a sector and move forward.
I think one of the challenges with talking about the centre, and I've really grappled with this, and particularly since I became leader of the Labour Party, is the centre isn't what I thought it was. If you think about what the centre, the way we would, as political animals, we might conceive the centre as being somewhere between the left and the right. The centre basically isn't. The centre's anyone who's willing to change their minds, willing to switch their votes. And in the last election, I had some bizarre conversations with people saying, I haven't quite decided how I'm going to vote yet. I'm tossing up between voting ACT or voting Green. And you kind of like, how do you get there? What's the journey that you're on that those are your two choices? So the centre is, it's most people don't think in terms of left and right in the way that people who are engaged in politics do.
Speaking of this and voters and who you're voting for, we've got a question from Riwai, who's a regular. He sent it in to us, so let me play it for you. This is Riwai. This is his question to you, Chris.
Kia ora, Chippy. Last election I voted for Te Pāti Māori because of better policy. Previously I've always voted for Labour. How will you get people like me that drifted away vote Labour again?
There you go. That's Riwai. I mean, do you even need to get them back again after what we've just talked about? But if you were to look at those people who have become disillusioned with Labour, how do you win them back?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, ultimately, I want to get every vote that I possibly can. And, if you look at my speech to the Labour Party conference in the weekend, it was pretty high level. There were some specific commitments, but we weren't setting out, if you like, our stall for the next election. We're not at that point yet. But at the highest level, I actually think what we need to do is convince New Zealanders that there is an alternative approach to managing the economy to the one that we have had for the last 30 or 40 years. Because for the last 30 or 40 years, Kiwis have been told you just work harder and, somehow a growing economy will mean that you'll be better off. When the reality is the economy's been growing and actually most people haven't been benefiting from that. It goes to the benefits of that growth are going to a smaller and smaller group of people. And so I actually think the way we're going to win back support and avoid the polarization and the populism that we're seeing in other countries at the moment is to convince those people who are feeling disaffected that actually there is a viable alternative. Because for too long, I think people have been told there is no alternative to the prevailing kind of economic orthodoxy that says you just have to work hard and somehow you'll get ahead, even though actually that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Just to let people know, we are taking questions on the chat or super chat. Just let you know, though, if you do a super chat, there's no guarantee your question will get asked. But Chewie, I'm going to ask another question. Maybe after that, we can get to a couple of questions from the chat. We just referenced America, and 15 million people didn't turn up to vote who voted for Biden because Trump got about the same number, and then 15 million people didn't vote for Harris. They disappeared for whatever reasons. What did you yourself, or what did the Labour Party learn watching that election that you think you'll take to heart for our next election, if anything?
I think Harris fought the campaign on the wrong ground, to be honest. She sort of tried to take Trump on a range of issues that weren't the issues that Americans were really caring about. Election, and there's a sort of old mantra in an election campaign, you have to answer the question that voters are asking. She was answering a whole lot of questions that they weren't asking. And so when you look at the demographics, they lost a lot of Hispanic voters, despite Donald Trump's position on immigration. That's got to have alarm bells ringing in the Democrat headquarters about like how is it that that Hispanic voters in places like Arizona and New Mexico were voting Trump? How is it that young women across the US were voting for Trump? And so I think you got to know who your voters are, and you got to know what they care about, and talking about a bunch of stuff that there's a lot of women in the States who care a lot about abortion but didn't vote based on abortion. They voted based on something else. So you've kind of got to be able to differentiate. You've got to be able to decide what are the issues that are going to determine someone's vote and make sure that you're answering the questions that they've got in that area. I said this to the Labour Party conference in the weekend. We've got to make sure we're talking about the issues that people care about, not just the issues that we think they should care about.
What are those issues, Chippy? What are those issues that people care about at the moment?
Well, I mean, right now, the polls will tell you overwhelmingly clearly, cost of living is still by far the number one issue that people care about. Healthcare has made its way to number two, and pretty convincingly so. And I actually think the one that's really rising up the ranks at the moment, and it's going to rise further and steadily in the next couple of months, is employment. People, people want to know that there are jobs out there. It's all very well the government bashing people with sticks, to get them off benefits. Where are the jobs? And so I think, those are going to be three of the pivotal issues at the next election. And then there's other issues. I mean, on cost of living, you could break that down further and say, okay, food prices have stabilized a bit, but rates are still going up, rents are still going up, power prices are actually going to go up more next year than they did this year, because the Electricity Authority have said that the lines companies and Transpower can hike up their prices. So these are things that are going to whack people in the pocket. Transport costs are likely to still go up. Let's see what happens to the price of, the international crude price. But actually, transport's not going to get cheaper. And so the cost of living crisis is by no means over, despite Nicola Willis basically trying to claim that it is.
Chewie, some questions?
How do you like all of those points are really good, and I agree that those are the big ticket items. How do you balance that with, say, some of the smaller but very emotive issues? We've seen here this government go after Māori, disabled people, just really attack all of those little bits and pieces as part of their we can't afford any of this nice stuff attack. You will have people try and nail you down on how do we deal with Israel? How do we deal with Russia? All of these things, but that's not necessarily going to win you huge votes, but it's going to make a lot of noise. How do you balance those things?
I think you have to know your values and you've got to stick with your values. I think one of the things that makes people so cynical about politics is where they see politicians ducking and diving away from issues because they think they're not vote winners. You still got to know your values and stick to them. So let's take the Treaty Principles Bill, for example. I'm vehemently opposed to that. I attended the Hikoi, and actually, the thing that I was really excited about coming out of the back of that was I think David Seymour wanted nothing more than for an angry mob to descend on Parliament, and he
Yeah.
didn't get it. He got people saying, actually, this isn't New Zealand. This isn't what we want. We're going to be positive. We're going to talk about a positive future and how we can actually be united as a country.
There
So I
was
think
one
you
arrest.
can.
One arrest, and it was a counter-protester.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
you can actually demonstrate your values without giving the other side what they want. And so, I think that the people who organised the Hikoi, full credit to them, because they basically made a really positive statement about we don't have to allow this to divide us as a country. We can actually come together. So I think that's how you do it. Similarly on Palestine, Israel, we should be clear on what our position as a country, and we should just be consistent about that. Israel's actions in Palestine are illegal. They've been found by the International Criminal Court to be illegal, and New Zealand should stick with its principles and back the International Criminal Court.
Speaking of that, this was a clip that I didn't hear about until I saw the right-wing Twitterverse go mental about it. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon earlier this week asking about would New Zealand arrest Benjamin Netanyahu if he came to New Zealand.
The International Criminal Court a couple of weeks ago issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant. If either of them came to New Zealand, would we enforce those warrants?
Yes, we support the ICC, and as I've said to you all along, those are matters before the court. But we believe in the international rules-based system. We support the ICC, and we'd be obligated to do so.
Your response to what the Prime Minister said?
Well, for once, you found me agreeing with Christopher Luxon tonight.
Good.
If you want to be part of the international rules-based system, you have to accept the outcome of bodies like the International Criminal Court. I'm quite surprised by that, actually. I'm surprised but encouraged by his answer. I thought it was a good answer.
Yeah, good. It's a strange question to ask you now after you've just said that. It's a good answer. Our old mate Bomber, Bomber, always talks about this government as a racist, far-right government. Do you think this government's racist?
I think things like the Treaty Principles Bill are designed to provoke racism. So I don't, the problem with saying a government's racist is you're suggesting that everybody in it is, and I don't believe that. I actually think there's a lot of national MPs who are quite horrified at what's going on at the moment. In fact, I know that because they're telling everybody that. So I wouldn't want to say that the government is racist because I don't think that's fair on a number of the people who are in it. But bills like the Treaty Principles Bill are designed to stoke racial division.
So therefore, does that mean the Treaty's Principle Bill is a racist bill if it's designed to do that?
I think so. Yes, I think so.
So where does that put David Seymour in that question? Is David Seymour racist in your opinion?
Well, David Seymour's aiming to stoke racial division, and I think that's reprehensible. To be frank, political leaders should be more responsible than that. David Seymour knows exactly what he's doing. It's a calculated move on his part. And all this whole innocent, I just want to have a discussion with people is just nonsense. He knows full well what he's doing.
Super chat that's come in. I'm one of many who left New Zealand to live in Australia to get ahead. I would love to come back to New Zealand, but the salaries are too low. Will this ever change? That's from SP. Thank you for your super chat, SP. Will this ever change, Chippy?
Yeah, yes, and it must. Because, I said this in the weekend at the Labour Party conference as well. My kids are young. They're at primary school now. I don't want them growing up and thinking that the only way they can get ahead, like the person who just asked this comment, is to move to Australia or to move further afield. I want them to know that there's opportunities for them here in New Zealand. So, it's not a simple answer, though, because the answers involve how do we create better, well-paid jobs? How do we make sure that, things like collective bargaining are strengthened? How do we make sure that, all of the benefits of economic growth aren't flowing to the minority who sit at the top? There's a whole lot of moving parts to that. But if you look at some of the things out of Australia that actually differentiate New Zealand and Australia has a higher savings rate. So through their compulsory superannuation retirement savings, they actually have a much greater pool of capital that generates wealth for their country. They have a different tax system to New Zealand. So, we are talking about tax in New Zealand. Australia's tax system is much more diversified than New Zealand is. The government generates more, can therefore have more choices about how it spends that revenue. And because their economy's been growing faster than ours, that gives the government, again, more choices and more revenue. If you're a teacher, a doctor, a nurse, people in those social sector professions, looking at police, looking at Australia and saying, oh, I can get paid more in Australia, you'll pay more tax in Australia as well. But which is more important to you, because ultimately that's the higher salary that's going to leave you better off.
It's one of these eternal questions, though, isn't it? Because we want to pay our public servants, being teachers, nurses, doctors, firefighters, all those guys, better, but that requires a bigger war chest, so to speak, to pay them. That requires more revenue from the government. This current government seems to go, well, if we make the economy better, everything will be okay, which is just an offshoot of trickle-down economics, which has never worked anywhere ever. So it seems like a fair tax system is the way to do that. I think both me and Chewie would agree, of all the parties, we kind of like the Greens tax package at the last election. And one of those things, and we talked about this last time, was the capital gains tax. I mean, how do we sell this message, Chippy, that if you want to live like they do in Scandinavian, then we probably need to get an income for our government like they do in Scandinavian, and then that will give us, how do we sell that line to people and have them not going, I'm not paying more tax, and vote for the other guys?
Yeah, I mean, there's that sort of joke that, New Zealanders want Scandinavian-style public services, but American-style taxes. And the truth is you can't have both of those things.
Yeah, exactly.
If you want those public services, you have to pay for them somehow. If you want, universal superannuation, we have to pay for that. If you want high-quality health and education, you have to pay for that. Having said all of that, there are things that we can do that'll help us. More money on preventative healthcare means less money on, more advanced healthcare. Preventative healthcare is cheaper than treating someone after they've gotten sick. And so there are things that we can do that will mean better bang for buck. Inequality is a massive contributor to government costs. So, if you get the economy rejigged so that the playing field tilts a bit more towards equality, then actually government costs go down, because the costs that we pay for crime, the costs that we pay for trying to level the kind of playing field because the playing field's so uneven, the costs that we pay for educational underachievement, all of the things that go with inequality, if you really tackle inequality, you actually reduce a lot of those costs.
Another question from the chat. Rajan says, is it time to finally legalise cannabis? $1 billion in tax could be had. That's what the last number was, 1 to 1.5 billion. Is it time to legalise cannabis? Are you pro-legalisation or decriminalisation of cannabis?
Decriminalisation I'd be closer to than full legalisation, but it's not something I've looked at recently. I do have some concerns, so be upfront about that. If you look at the problems that we have at the moment around drug and alcohol in New Zealand, it's actually, the problem's getting worse. I do support treating drug, as we do with alcohol, drug and alcohol addiction and abuse, as a health issue rather than a criminal issue, hence my position on decriminalisation. Full legalisation, I'm not yet convinced.
Let's do a question from a video question. This is from Manju. Let me bring this up for you. And this speaks to, I guess, the next election and what you're going to do to be a bit more pithy. Maybe that's the correct way to set this up.
Kia ora. I'm curious to know if Labour Party has identified that messaging is an area that needs to be prioritised, because in my opinion, you dropped the ball big time in the last election. So what is the plan to come up with catchy one-liners that would stay in the minds of people and combat the mis- and disinformation propaganda of the current coalition of chaos? Thank you.
What I hear in her question as well, she may not be saying this, but one of the reasons Trump won is he did independent media better than Harris. there was a different way to get the messaging out as well. So I guess what it's saying is, I know a couple of years out, but you've just, is it appointed Karen to be sort of in charge of it. What are you guys talking about? And I'm just going to be more blunt. How are you going to election better?
Yeah, I think sharpening our message, absolutely. Recognizing that where people get their news from has changed is something that we were too slow to adapt to. So, if you look in 2020, we were miles ahead of the National Party on Facebook, and everyone was getting their political news from Facebook. By 2023, they'd shifted, and actually more people were getting their political news from TikTok and Instagram than they were from Facebook, and the National Party was streets ahead of us there. Come 2026, who knows where the people are going to be? They might not be on any of those platforms anymore. They might be somewhere else. So we're actually going to have to be much faster in adapting to where people get their news from. But I guess I'd say a few words of caution about that. One of the things that's causing Christopher Luxon to come unstuck now is he made everything sound very simple before the election. He said, oh, look, everything can be solved with these nice little catchy phrases and catchy little, easy wins. And the reality is, as he's proving, they can't be. A lot of the things that we're talking about are big problems that require big solutions. And the challenge there for politicians who believe that we should actually fix the problem rather than just campaign to win regardless, is that they're not always easy to communicate.
Chewie, you got anything you want to chuck in there, or is there anything from the chat that you've seen?
I apologize, Chris. I'm a cheeky wee monkey. Not seeing New Zealand Labour there.
On Blue Sky.
Not
on Blue Sky yet?
No, I'm not on Blue Sky.
It's the fastest growing social media. The fastest growing social
Twitter,
media.
Right, it's replaced Twitter. Yeah.
Well, it's got 20 or 30. It's got 25 million users now. Twitter's got 330, so Twitter still dwarfs it. But it's Jack Dorsey. Is that right? His name, Chewie? Jack Dorsey. Darcy?
Yeah, the guy that set up Twitter when he sold it to Elon basically didn't sell him the source code, so just set up Twitter 2.0.
Yeah.
There's been a huge exodus to it, and it's growing.
Okay,
yeah.
Blue Sky. Well, thank you. Something to follow up, or some homework from our discussion tonight.
Me and Chewie can be your first follow. Pithy kind of slogans and stuff. Have you heard the phrase "Nikki no boats" in your office at all? Has it come up at any stage?
Yeah, it has. And look, I do.
Vindication.
I think that the difficult line that we have to tread is I'm all for pithy phrases and everything, but I'm also mindful that sort of pettiness turns a lot of people off as well. And so, as much as I have sympathy for that particular catchphrase, I kind of want to keep it at a level that maybe doesn't leave us open to being accused of being.
You don't want a sticker? I can send you a sticker, Chris. Hey, look, and you know what? Me and Chewie are immature man children, so we don't have to worry about any of those things that you have to worry about. We can just get on with it. Actually, you know what? Enough. That was actually someone in our chat came up with that, and we just went, oh, gold, and we ran with it. So
can we springboard off this into talking about the ferries?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
we were talking the other night that Nicola has said that there'd be an update about the ferries before Christmas. Is this
20th of December?
Is this going to be her throwing a hand grenade into the spa pool on the 20th and running away?
Yeah.
Well, she didn't say which Christmas, so that's. But the reality here is, if I think the fact that they're moving it closer and closer to Christmas means it's clearly not going to be good news. So they want to get it as far away from, the sort of people's attention spans as possible. But let's be clear about, if they go ahead with the not rail capable ferries, they're still going to have to build wharves and terminals, because the wharves and terminals need to be replaced, regardless of whether you have small ferries or big ferries or whatever. And then all they're doing by having smaller ferries is you're transferring cost onto the people who are trying to move stuff across the Cook Strait. So, if you're transporting stuff from Auckland to Christchurch by train, this is, you're going to put it on a train in Auckland, you're going to get it to Wellington, you're going to take it off a train, put it on a truck, put it onto a ferry, take it off the ferry, take it off the truck, put it back on the train, put it back on, take it to Christchurch, and then put it back off the train and onto a truck. All of that extra cost, who pays that? You know, the end consumer are the people who pay it. And, you know, so it's transferring cost away from government back onto New Zealanders.
So National blew this up. If you're successful in winning the next election, which historically a one-term government in New Zealand is a big ask. It's a big
Slim
mountain
pickings.
to climb.
Yeah.
How do you put that back together?
Yeah, well,
Do
one
you
of the
go
challenges
back to Hyundai and go, hey, we're back?
Yeah, one of the challenges there will be that companies like Hyundai will probably say, who wants to deal with New Zealand, given how unreliable they are. But the reality is we do need rail-capable ferries. Until we know what they're proposing, it's going to be hard for us to say, you know, what we would do. It may be that we end up buying whatever the ferries are that they commit to, but then continuing on with the next generation after that to make sure we can get rail capability put back on them. You know, it was just such a reckless and irresponsible decision that they took. I mean, and very, very cynical too. You know, they were more interested in basically scoring points about the cost escalation than they were about, you know, providing a good, reliable connection.
How many days after they make that announcement do you think they realise, we're screwed up? Because it's pretty obvious that, you know, we played it here, this whole second-hand Corolla, not a Ferrari, all this stuff that they went on about, which was part of their patter. And now what's going to happen is they're going to pay the price of a Ferrari to get us a second-hand Corolla. They're going to do it in reverse, because whatever they get, including the break fees from Hyundai, it's guaranteed to be more than the $3 billion, including the wharves and stuff. And they're going to give us a shittier product, the shittification of our ferry service. Here's my ask, Chris. If that comes in when you guys get back in and you follow through on that deal, can we please name them after Nicola Willis and Christopher Luxon? So every time someone's on that boat and it's not fit for purpose, they remember who the hell did it. Can you give that to us? Can you please let us have that?
Yeah, it's a great idea. But I have it on good authority that Winston Peters said to Nicola Willis at the cabinet meeting where they decided to scrap the deal, well, this one will be on your head. Oof. So,
and if Winston's getting it right, that must be a pretty obvious thing then.
Exactly. Hey, but actually, you mentioned something about a one-term government before, which I think it's useful to pick up on, because we would have had one-term national governments regularly if we had had MMP earlier. You know, National managed to get back into government multiple times because of first past the post. So Rob Muldoon would have been a one-term prime minister if we had had a proportional representation system. He actually got fewer votes than Labor in 1978 and in 1981, but still formed government because of first past the post. In 1993, here's the kicker, after one term of the Bolger-Shipley-Richardson government, after one term, Labor and the Alliance got 53% of the vote, you know, and yet still didn't form the government. So it can happen. It's just the electoral system hasn't.
Yeah, and look, we've been saying the thing that these guys are doing, we have talked about them, but that's not the main reason you're here, is that they've moved. What normally happens in the cycle is people they bed in that first term, they start to do a few things in the second term. By the third term, everyone's sick of them and they vote them out. Those guys have seen with some of their policies that have got to that third term, I'm sick of you already. So for a lot of people, so that might be the thing. It might be that at the end of this cycle, people might feel about them like they would normally at the end of a second or third cycle, and that we're just honest with our viewers and we go, it doesn't happen very often, but you know, if you vote, you win. That's how the old adage goes. Yeah. We talked, I think we talked to you last time, maybe we did, maybe we didn't, about a little bit of mongrel, seeing a little bit of mongrel in the Labour Party, and you're a lovely man and you're very nice, and I don't want to be critical of you. If I am, though, and I hurt your feelings, I'll send you a sausage roll. You know, you asked a question last week on breakfast, how would you rate Christopher Luxon's performance for the first 12 months? And you went, it's a mixed result. And we were like, no, it was fucking awful. You know, it was like, I know that there's a professionalism, and having Willie Jackson come out and say things like, I don't know where he said it, but he's like, I'm sick of being nice. Like I'm from now on, I'm not going to be nice. Do you think Labor misses that a bit more? We need a bit more of the kind of, I mean, like, I'm not saying we like Winston or David Seymour, but they do have a bit of mongrel about them when they want to, and it cuts through the bullshit sometimes, with the perceived bullshit for them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I do those interviews on TV, I'll let you in on a little secret. The people that I always have in the back of my mind are the people who used to vote Labor and voted National last time.
Right.
And so, in the answers that I'm giving, the question that I'm always asking myself is this going to make them more or less likely to vote Labor next time?
Okay.
And if they voted National last time, only 1 year after the election, they want us to see us being reasonable. It's like if you go out, I'll give you it's not a very good analogy. I'm just kind of making it up on the spot, but you go out and you buy a new pair of shoes, and your partner's with you and says those shoes don't fit you and you're not going to like them, but you buy them
Yep.
anyway. You don't want to turn around when you get home and say, oh, you were right, actually these shoes don't fit me and they're not really that good. But over time you'll get to that point and you'll be like, okay, actually I should go and get some other shoes. Voting's not dissimilar to that. You actually have to give people a chance to change their minds, and smacking them in the face with it isn't necessarily going to do that.
That's interesting, eh? And look, you're the professional here, completely, but the idea of going, because in my head I'm now going, the research, what would it say about kind of being blunt and direct now, or waiting a bit longer to do it? Sorry, Chewie, I cut you off.
Oh, you may live to regret throwing it to me. Okay, so you're the face of the party and you have to be the reasonable one, winning over the people that can't decide red or blue. You have to point to someone in your front row to be your attack dog. Who do you point at?
Yeah, look, Kieran's going to be doing more of that as our campaign manager. Willie just does it whether we want him to or not. And actually he's fantastic, and I think he does a great job of it. Aisha Verrill, you'll see her doing that in health. You'll see Ginny doing it in police. So, look, you'll see more mongrel coming out over the next year or so. Don't underestimate the fact that, we did need a year or so to kind of recalibrate after losing the election. It's a big adjustment going from being government to being opposition. But actually, I think our team have kind of hit their stride now. So you'll see us putting a lot more pressure on them next year.
I'm wondering about political parties lying. I mean, I've written down a question here that says, does this government lie? I mean, politicians lie on and off. How do you fight that? How do you fight the misinformation coming from an opposition, not meaning you're in opposition, from the other party that you're fighting up against?
Well, the challenge with saying that they're lying is I think they genuinely believe the rubbish that they're saying. And so, I think in their minds it's not a lie because they just don't seem to believe in science, evidence, or facts. And that makes it quite difficult to say that they're lying because they genuinely believe this crap. And so I just think we've got to get back to the point where politicians should at least have some evidence basis for the decisions that they make.
Well, these guys run from that. I mean, it's like they literally won't take expert advice. So, yeah. Anything else in the chat there, Chewie? I mean, you've been very generous with your time, Chris. We should let you go at some stage.
So many start. I'm just trying to look for.
Well,
actual...
you have a look, and let me ask you this question: once David Seymour becomes Deputy Prime Minister, he has more sort of power. Is that a dangerous situation for New Zealand to be in? Is him at DPM, or is our political structure strong enough to kind of keep him in check?
I think it's going to get harder and harder for them to hold this government together as they get, as the term progresses. And Winston Peters and David Seymour playing swapsies is going to be quite a pretty critical moment for the government to get through, I think. The bit that worries me is I think, Christopher Luxon will need to discover a bit more backbone compared to what he's shown so far if David Seymour's going to be his deputy. He's shown an absolute unwillingness to basically say to Seymour or Winston Peters or Shane Jones or Casey Costello or Nicole McKee, no, that's not okay. That doesn't meet the standards that I expect of ministers. Yeah. And he needs to discover that pretty quickly.
I reckon we go to the chat, Chewie, and grab a few of them, and then I've got one more question, and then whatever you've got, Chewie, as well. So I'll sit back and try not to interrupt, and you can just ask chat questions now.
Sweet as. So this is from our live viewers and that sort of thing. Kia ora, Chris. Do you think the Treaty Principles Bill is a deliberate distraction while the government quietly removes Treaty of Waitangi provisions from those 26 pieces of legislation behind the scenes?
I don't think they're that organised. I don't think they have that much of a plan, but I think we need to be careful to make sure that it doesn't become a distraction from those other things that they're doing, which also can be very, very divisive.
Cool. The next one, I'm going to give you an out on this one. You don't have to say anything. I just want to put it up.
Krista, is Luxon as much of a twat in real life as on screen?
And moving on.
Yeah, good, thanks.
Will you fight for a capital gains tax, argue a fair tax to fix our healthcare system, get big dollar donors out of political campaigns, make a case to reduce the dairy herd, move to food agriculture for clean air and water, 3 waters for lower rates? That is our best value for $20 question that I've seen tonight.
Okay,
you can attack that at your will.
I'll go through them in order. Will I fight for a fairer tax system? Yes. What that looks like, we're working through the details of. Getting big donors out of politics. Yes, I do think we need to have, reform of the way our system works. You've just taken the question away. Now, I can't
sorry, I just didn't want to cover your face. There we go.
Yeah. Making the case for reducing the dairy herd. Look, I'm all in favour of sustainable farming. There are ways for us to reduce our agricultural emissions, and we should be doing that. Reducing the dairy herd's not the only way of achieving that. Move to food agriculture for clean air and water. I'm not quite sure what that part of the question actually means. We need sustainable farming. We need environmentally sustainable farming. So yes, I think we should do. We should make sure our farming is all sustainable. 3 waters for lower rates. Yes, of course, we should have a better system for running our water infrastructure. What this government have come up with guarantees that rates are going to go up more than they need to be.
There's a good chat here, which is sort of a good wrapping up chat. I don't know if you've got any more in there, because it's sort of, I think, a bit of a cheeky comment as well as a question from Ken. You ready for an early election?
Yeah. If we need to fight an early election, we will be. The bit for us that's always challenging with an early election is money, obviously. We take 3 years to raise the money to run an election campaign, but in the event that an election campaign was called early, we'd be putting out we'd be rattling the tin, and certainly our team would be ready.
Although in this day and age about the fight, I mean, like you have seen it in America as well, the independent media and stuff that's out there, like us, for example, it's a good return on investment, which is zero.
Yeah.
Chewie, do you have any other questions for Chris? I've got one more that we'll wrap with, but have you got anything else you want to get in there?
Absolutely. Talking about money, the right just out earn you from donations by such a massive degree. How do you fight that?
So the challenge for us that's always been a challenge for us. The right parties have always made more money fundraising than the left parties have. The thing that's been our competitive advantage is people. The challenge now that we're starting to see is that the right are using their money to buy people. So, we had people out door knocking and so on, and they were all volunteers. National Party were paying door knockers at the last election. Now, that's a relatively new development. So I think our competitive advantage still has to be having more people, more boots on the ground than them. And I think that's how we can level the playing field. We're never going to have as much money as them. And frankly, I don't want it, because if it comes with strings attached, then it means that you're not going to make the sort of decisions that we need to make the country fairer for everybody.
All right, my last question is, because we're going to move into a story now after we say goodbye to you about the police numbers, targets missing. But before we do that, what are your thoughts around what the police commissioner said today? Basically kind of going, well, I'm paraphrasing, but I don't really care what they said. This is what's going to happen, and they're going to miss another promise from pre-election of the numbers of police. Got any thoughts around that?
Yeah, basically, it's not just about training new police, it's also about retaining the ones that you've got. They basically botched the pay negotiations, and a bunch of police left. And that means that the target of the number, so in order to get 500 more, you have to train 500 more, plus you've got to train the number that you need to replace the people who have left. And that's where they're coming unstuck, because more people are leaving, so they have to train more people. If you actually want to get to the 500, you've got to keep the people you've got and train 500 more. They, you know, the way they handled the negotiations, which started under us, but they were ultimately the ones that, you know, that finished it. It's just made the target even harder for them to meet.
Actually, I do have one other question, because I was watching One News tonight and they talked about fluoridation, councils being forced to fluoridate. And I thought this is an interesting question coming from, or interesting proposal coming from this government, because at least 2/3 of this coalition were very anti-mandates and very pro-bodily autonomy, based on some certain things happening on the grass outside of Parliament. And I thought forcing councils to fluoridate doesn't sound like the kind of policy that these guys would have been all about. Almost feels a bit hypocritical, Chris. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think if they do it, it'll be good, because it means that they're actually following the science. You know, fluoridation is good for the country, and the evidence is overwhelming that it's safe, that actually it reduces health problems for the population as a whole, reduces the dental issues that we've got. We moved it to health from councils, because councils were being hijacked by people who frankly were peddling ignorance. And I think if the government want to back the Ministry of Health, I think it'll be a damn good thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm just thinking they didn't really want to do that when it came to, you know, certain vaccinations and stuff. They certainly used the amplification of that to help them get themselves elected. Two of those parties did.
Oh, and totally. And if you look at the consequences of that now, we've got childhood immunisation rates have plummeted. So it's not just about COVID vaccines. It's about the fact that now parents aren't getting their kids vaccinated, and we've got a whooping cough epidemic. You know, whooping cough could kill kids, and so it's not a trivial matter. So politicians who indulge kind of anti-vax conspiracy theories, it's not just irresponsible; it's downright dangerous.
Yeah. And we've just ticked over the 1 hour mark, so we are going to let you go. We could probably go for another hour, knowing us. This is our typical 20-minute conversation, Chris. Our 20-minute conversations go for an hour normally, don't they, Chewie?
Absolutely.
Is anything you want to leave our whānau with, Chris? You're here, you're talking to people. This is our largest live audience ever right now. So anything you want to say to them?
I hope they have a great Christmas, and you know, I know that you've got a fairly lefty audience, and my message to them.
News to me.
I know, shocking. But you know, I know my message to them is next year's going to be a very big year for us. You know, I think New Zealanders increasingly want to see, or they know that the current system isn't working for people like them. They want to see an alternative. We're absolutely committed to showing them that there is an alternative. And you know, so I in an interview that I did today, I drew a distinction between optimism and hope. So optimism means you just blindly believe that things are going to get better. I don't believe that. Hope means you think that things can get better if you're willing to work for them. I'm very hopeful going into the next year that we can improve things. We can get rid of this government, and we can actually put the country properly on the right track, a better track than the one that it's on at the moment.
Excellent. And just before we go, how many of those Nikki No Boat stickers did you want?
You better send a box to my office.
Oh, very good. Leader
Don't
of the
think we
opposition,
won't.
Christopher Hipkins. Chris, thanks for joining us, man. It's been a blast. And you have a great Christmas, and good luck in your onward fight for next year as well.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Cheers,
All the
Chris.
best.